Tell us who you are and what you do, and most importantly, a little bit about your self principle, if you will. I know you've written about that quite a bit, and I think that really helps people understand who you are.
Yeah, so for those of you guys who don't know me, I'm Sean Hashmi. I've been with Kaiser Permanente now for 16 years. I started over at Woodland Hills, still at Woodland Hills. I'm board certified nephrologist and obesity medicine specialist. I started out in internal medicine, switched over this way. I have a nonprofit. It's called Self Principle. Self stands for sleep, exercise, love, and food. And it's not something that I invented. Self is just the acronym that I use for it. But part of my research, and especially within Kaiser Permanente, part of my research was to figure out what is the right direction from a nutritional perspective that we should be advising our members in the Southern California region. And the challenge there was that there were so many different opinions, even amongst doctors. When I did this research, this is now going back, 15 years ago. At that point in time, I looked up over 2,200 studies on different diets. And there were thousands of different diets out there. And the real question was, if there are thousands of diets out there, right? I mean, we know about keto, we know about paleo, we know about plant-based and a few others, but there were literally thousands of diets. How incredibly confusing is it? So the concept between self-principle was that if you look at the longest living people on the planet, both from a lifespan and health span, you find that they had four things in common. The first one was that sleep became really, really important. Now, we all hear the common thing of sleeping 7 to 9 hours. And by the way, most Americans do not get enough sleep. But it turns out that actually more important than how much you sleep is your sleep schedule. So you could sleep 6 hours a night, not saying that's a good idea. But if you're able to go to bed at the same time every single night, wake up at the same time, regardless if it's the weekend or not, it makes a dramatic impact. So the data shows that sleep regularity is actually superior to sleep duration. Mm-hmm. Both together is the perfect weapon. Then it comes to exercise. And as you can see, exercise is an interesting topic. Of course, you're SME on it, subject matter expert. But my background was I ran the UCLA Taekwondo team for throughout my college years. And then I was a personal trainer for a long time. And I worked with a lot of people. I was on a board of one of the fitness bodies that does the certification. So long story short, I work with a lot of athletes. And when you are involved in the fitness world as much as you are, you start to get an idea of how complex it is. And it's actually even worse in the diet world, because for every technique and style of lifting, somebody else is out there saying something different. And then the love component, which I think if you said on self, what is the most important piece, would actually be L for love. And love isn't what people think. Love is a concept of being extremely selfish. And this is really difficult for people to understand because we're in a place where we ought to be giving. So why talk about selfishness? Well, it turns out that the act of selfishness is practicing gratitude. Because if you say thank you to somebody, the physical, emotional, mental, and longevity benefits you get is actually more than what you gave. So in other words, your ROI on practicing kindness and gratitude toward others is more than 100%. There isn't anything out there in the stock market that I know that has such an amazing return that's present over there. And then the second part of this is when we see patients and we talk about self and everything else, it turns out that at least in my 26-year career now, in my 26 years, I never met a patient who looked at a donut and said, this is the healthiest thing ever. Right? They looked at it and they said, oh my God, yeah, I know I shouldn't eat it. So the real question is, why do they? And so when we beat up a patient and say, why don't you just eat less and exercise more? We don't realize we don't need to beat them up. We are our own worst critic. We are so negative to ourselves. We say the darndest things. And then when we start to understand the trauma that goes into diseases like obesity, and we see that most patients are dealing with an emotional war every single day, and they come to a safe space, which is their doctor's office, and they get told, once again, why don't you eat less and move more? That logic doesn't hold. And finally, for food, it's a fascinating thing. I'm part of, on a national front, part of the conversation around food is medicine. It's a huge thing that we're working on. It's going to have tremendous benefit, not just for the organization, but for the entire country. Food is medicine is very powerful. But if you ever hear what I say, is I take it one step further. And I always say that food is more than just medicine. Food is culture. And
Mhm.
this is an incredibly important concept that people don't get. Where if I tell you, Dr. McDonald, I tell you, my diet is a perfect diet. You have to eat grass every single day, 3 times a day. And you say, but I grew up in a culture where maybe it's not grass, maybe it's something else that I remember my parents used to give it to us. We would sit at the table, we would share stories, we would joke, we would laugh. Food is part of so many of our memories that if you think about how powerful it is, and how if you create black and whites, you start to create situations where once again, our own self critic is already bad enough. And now you have somebody else being the next judge on top of this. And that's why self is so simple. And yet it's been proven time and time and time again.
I think that is the perfect summation of kind of who you are, what you do, and the perspective with which you bring to this conversation. So thank you so much for sharing that background. And again, full disclosure, I always tell my patients diet, sleep, exercise, and stress relief are going to do more for you than any medication in the world that I could ever prescribe. And so I'm definitely much on the bandwagon regarding those pieces, but also putting it within the context of a person's culture and their lifestyle and their job and you name it, and all the things we're dealing with.